Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
And I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lyman Book Club. Today we're starting Checkmate by Dorothy Dunnett, and we're going to talk about the first four chapters. I'll lead the discussion, but before we dive in, you guys, I would love to hear your initial reactions to the first four chapters.
They're back. We've been wondering where they've been this whole time, and we get our dosage of Jarrett and Marta almost right away. So, chapter 2.
Yeah, it was really fun to see them and just to get a glimpse of what's happened. I'm super curious about how did they end up married, and they seem to be having problems. Unsurprisingly, like this marriage is on one hand like makes total sense, on the other hand a complete disaster. And it's very intriguing. Like, yeah, they do not seem, it seems like they could complement each other, but they don't. So yeah.
Well, and it seems, I don't really know the backstory yet. Maybe we'll delve into that about the issues they're having. But it seems to be one of the main one is how they're both dealing with Lymond coming back into their lives. So
Yeah,
that would be the crux of the problem. Who knows?
I'm assuming there's major baggage that we don't know about. And yeah, I mean, we know some of the baggage, but I'm assuming there's other baggage that we may or may not learn. So we'll see. I'm enjoying the mystery of the Dame du Dutance's house. Like, I'm kind of excited. We ended this session into the chapter 4, so we're about ready to like go explore a dark and spooky house, like creepy house, which sounds kind of fun. So I'm excited for chapter 5.
Yeah, I just have to say I love how the house thing like embraces all the tropes of sort of like a gothic horror mystery kind of story.
Yeah, like Lyman literally says something about how it's not a gothic something, or like that literally comes up in the text of the book, which
Yep. Well, it's like, oh, Lyman, don't get ahead of yourself there.
yeah. I mean, I would not put it past this author to have like ghosts or something. Like, maybe there won't be, but if there are, I'm not going to be totally surprised.
The ghost of the Dame de Dutance.
Exactly. Like, she's
here with another prophecy.
Yeah, for sure. So that was fun. I'm kind of liking that we get this like political sort of battle setup thing happening, but I like that we're not actually dealing with all of France, or all, like, it's not a large political map that we're looking at. It's just like what's around Lyon right now. So I kind of like that we sort of have their forces coming, and the townspeople, like the burghers, I guess you call them, the towns leaders, or they've got political stuff and all that. But I don't know, it seems more contained politically than the last book.
A bit more human scale and like fewer people to keep track of, and the people that you do meet, you meet them on the human level, like the Marechal de Saint Andre.
Yeah, that woman.
Was she in book 2?
I think she's in it very briefly. Her husband Saint Andre is in it a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I remembered him.
Yeah, he's like one of the dudes.
One of those 4 sort of.
That's right. That's all I remembered. He was one of the dudes.
He's like the oldest of those dudes.
Right. Not the
not Penguin.
Thank you. Yes, not that one.
No.
Or Daubeny.
But it is heavily implied, and I guess we'll get to it, that Lyman slept with Saint Andre.
Yeah.
And his wife now, and is being set up to marry the daughter.
Yeah. It's like, wow.
Gets around France. Apparently his family gets around France, so.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised none of you has remarked on this because I think Philippe, you said it last time. Like, I miss Lymond imposter syndrome. We have in just the first 4 chapters Lymond imposter syndrome, Piero Strozzi imposter syndrome, and Philippa above all.
Yes, I wasn't going to mention it here, but it was definitely going to come up at some point. So
when there was those lists in the, I think it's on the very first page, or like the first page moving into the second page or something, but Austen Gray is moving through this building and there's like this list of like this man and this man and this man and this man, and I literally thought, like, which one of these guys is Lyman? Like, and one of them was, well, no, maybe not in that list, but he's obviously in disguise. So
it's a tenor, apparently.
Yeah, apparently disguising himself as Castrati, which was odd. Like, his voice must be really high.
Yes. All right, should we dive into the first chapter then?
Just one quick comment first. I think, and maybe it's because we didn't really take a very long break between finishing the last book and this one, but I think that out of all 6 books, this is the best opening that I've read. It's very succinct, it's to the point, it like things are already happening. There's not really new characters being thrown at our faces, like, and it feels like a gathering of old friends. So I really appreciated that, and I'm looking very much forward to the rest of the book because of that.
Yeah, I think it compares to me with the opening of Pawn and Frankincense, but Pawn and Frankincense had a lot of strangers in that opening, like in the baths and everything. It was people we didn't know, and this one it's a bunch of people we do know. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, it was a nice, I actually don't know if I didn't really make many comments or notes in the margins. I just really enjoyed reading it. It was just a nice story to read. So yeah.
And Dunnett jumps right back into hurting animals in the very first chapter. It's like, oh, a cockfight, of course.
Gosh.
Yeah, I always get very horrified by that, but it's interesting on a symbolic level in terms of what it's like, what it means for characters and who's paralleled with which of them and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was super interesting. Like, there's a yellow bird. I wonder who that is.
That wins in the end.
Yeah, that's almost dead and completely worn down and then comes back and wins.
Yeah, and Austen Gray thinks that he's that one, and that Lyman, who's in disguise, is the red one, because he's in disguise as a redhead. But we may have reason to be skeptical of Austen's point of view.
Yes.
So speaking of which, let me summarize quickly the first chapter, and then we'll dive in. So we start with Austen Gray. He is meeting with Lyman at an inn in Douai. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Which is in Flanders, a bit outside of France. So they're like in English territory, which is why all the French and their allies are showing up in disguise.
Is it Flanders in Brussels?
It's on the map, if you want to check.
Okay.
But I don't know the geography very well. I just know I looked at it on the map and it's like a little bit to the east of France, of the French border.
I couldn't find it.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, it's in the middle, kind of. Like,
oh wait, Flanders, Brussels. I don't know. Brussels is a city. I don't know. I don't know.
Like up towards the top where it says Flanders, it's right below the S in Flanders.
Yeah, there's Douai.
Yeah. So it's like,
oh, I see it. Okay, cool. Right near Artois.
Yeah.
Flanders in the Low Countries.
The Low Countries.
Yes. Okay. So, but anyway, so Lyman is meeting with Austen Gray there, and Austen is there to help him escape France and return to Russia. Austen has been directed to do so by another returning face, Lord Grey of Wilton, blast from the past, who, although they both have excellent reasons to dislike Francis Crawford, they don't want him helping the French, and so they are willing to take this risk to help him escape and get back to Russia. Piero Strozzi shows up in disguise as a Piedmontese cockmaster, even though he's really a Marshal of France, one of the highest ranking military powers, and points Austen toward Lymond, who is in disguise as a red-haired countertenor named Hilary. Lymond arranges to meet Austen in his room after the cockfight, but when Austen goes to his room, Strozzi appears and kidnaps him. Austen then assumes that this whole thing was a trap to get him and that Strozzi and Lymond were working together. Austen gets knocked out, so he misses the fact that actually it's a trap for Lymond, and Strozzi's trying to get Lymond and get him to stay in France. Lyman kills 4 of Strozzi's men who have been ordered not to harm him, so that's pretty intense. And then Strozzi offers Lymond a divorce in exchange for serving France as a military leader for the next year. Lymond agrees. The end of the chapter is Austen and Lord Grey regrouping, both believing that Lymond actually betrayed them and the whole thing was a trap for Austen. And Austen is kind of being berated for not killing Lymond and regretting it, but he can't kill Lymond because it's against his honor, because he is in love with and wants to marry Lymond's wife.
Ooh, surprise.
This is my not shocked face.
Mm-mm.
All right, what do you guys think? Stuff you want to dive into?
I mean,
This is just a general note. Do you have the translations for the quotes in each chapter?
I do.
Do they actually relate to what's happening in the chapter, or are they just sort of flavor text?
I think they're a mix. It would probably take some time to parse their relationship. So if you want, I can go get the quotes and read them, or I can just send them to you like ahead of time, or however you want to do it.
Yeah, let's not worry about it now, but
yeah,
I would be interested at some point to know what they're saying.
I like that they're saying.
A language I do not speak, unfortunately.
They are the prophecies of Nostradamus, as mentioned in the intro.
Intriguing. This is a completely random side comment, but something I got very confused by something on page 10, where one of the cockfights is over. The first one is over, and there's a dead bird and a live bird, and it says they take the dead bird out for the pot, so they're going to cook the dead bird. Okay. And the owner, which at this point I think is Strozzi, his face beaming red in the torchlight, lifted the victor, meaning the bird, tenderly in his thick hands, and with his tongue began searching its injuries. Is he licking the bird? Like, I do not understand this.
I don't know that that's Strozzi.
Or somebody, well, whatever, whoever it is. I was like, this is how you figure out if your bird is injured? I was very confused.
I was guessing that this is part of keeping the bird alive, like maybe the licking it, and also the next thing, the curative urine, are part of like preventing infection.
I did not realize that human saliva was able to do this. Like, so weird.
Well, I think this is an interesting passage. I actually highlighted it for a couple of reasons, because one, it's so viscerally gross.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clearly like, well, this is actually the thing I wanted to ask you guys is interesting, is how much of it is Austen's point of view being horrified by this, and how much of it is Dunnett kind of just being like, this is horrible. Because I think she definitely puts those in there like specifically to show that, like, even though this book starts with cockfighting, it's portrayed in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I think it can serve both, because she is sort of mentioning the horrors of it, but we've also seen that Austen Grey is sort of naive in what he wants, and hasn't really seen a lot in his short life so far. So that just being sent out to this town on his own, trying to find Lymond, who he thinks he would recognize, and he does, but it's only because he's pointed out. He's got this naivete about him. Like, I guess he wasn't expecting this kind of visceral violence.
Yeah, I actually think it's Austen's perspective, because there's a lot of things like they like to fight, it was said. So like Austen is sort of relaying what people have told him about cockfighting, but you get the sense that he is skeptical about this. And just things like by the end of it, the golden fowl, slashed and impaled, was sorely beaten, but continued steadily, blah, blah, blah. Then it weakened. In silence among the screaming spectators, Austen Gray watched the tired legs beginning to tremble. And it says Austen had laid no wagers. So like he's not betting on this. And I mean, I'm guessing it's probably done it as well, but it does seem that Austen's perspective is that he is not into this.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure Austen's not into it. I think the question is also like Dunnett showing it as awful. But I think what's really interesting about Austen here is the bits where he's like looking through the eyes of the man opposite. You could, he supposed, see a barbaric magnificence in it. So there's several moments throughout this where he's thinking about Lymond and thinking of Lymond as like one of these birds. That Lymond is this violent, uncouth person, and that like there's weirdly like part of Austen that he's like halfway, or he's like mostly horrified by it and judging this completely false perception of Lymond, but also sort of envious of it, because Lymond has the wife that he wants, and Lyman wouldn't hesitate to kill an enemy the way that like Austen does, and then is berated by his uncle for. So there's like a jealousy, fascination, judgment, horror thing happening between Austen and Lymond that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean the end on the bottom of page 11 where it says it should have been the end. The yellow bird twitched and raised its stained head. It lifted itself shivering. It stood and might have fallen. Instead, in a single magic explosion of courage and anger, it hurled forward the naked head and caught the blinded red foe by the throat. Then springing high in the air, the yellow cock brought down its spurs in a stroke no living bird could have fended. So that like it might have fallen, but instead in a single magic explosion of courage and anger, and it's just very Lyman-esque.
Yeah, and then like shortly after that we have Austen thinking of himself as the as the yellow one, and he thinks of Strozzi and Lymond as the bragging red gamecock, two of them against the tormented yellow, meaning himself. Is he right?
No. I mean, I guess he's got the right to imagine himself as any combination of birds he wants to, but I do not think that's where the symbolism is leading us.
Yeah, I think also, so it's like right before that's on the bottom of 9, same kind of thing where he's watching Lymond in disguise as Hilary, talking and quarreling and shrieking, watching the cockfight. And Austen thinks it was not, he thought, acting. Most men of war delighted in cockfighting. And we can read that and just be like, honey, he's acting. He's definitely acting.
No.
I mean, Austen hasn't really been around Lyman that much. He doesn't know what he's capable of.
Well, and remember when he was, what did he do? Lymond.
He knocked him senseless. Well, no, he was trying not to hurt him.
Yeah, and Philippe ordered him to and knocked him out. And then Lymond also like threatened Philippa in front of Austen. So you can't entirely blame Austen.
Yeah, I'm sure Austen is a fine young man for what he is. We're just comparing him to Lyman, so he's like coming off as this callow youth who doesn't know how to deal with the world. But if you take him on his own merits, he's probably fine. Just
a bit naive.
Yeah, very naive, exactly.
There is a great like kind of re-intro for new readers. Like you could pick this book up and you'd have a hard time, but she does put in a fair amount of kind of reminders. So there's a great reintro to Lyman on page 9 that's like, it couldn't be. This half-fledged ebullient Graindor could never be the man who controlled armies in Russia, whose skill in war was so celebrated that Lord Grey was prepared to take any risk to help him leave France. And yet, ... and all this, like, I just love this this setup as all these different sides of Lyman, and Dunnett pulling out her old trick from the very first book that she also used relentlessly in the third book of a point of view character who's completely unsympathetic to Lyman and doesn't get him at all.
Yep.
I have a question for you two. Austin is very skeptical, but Lord Grey believes that this is a legitimate rendezvous and escape attempt for Lymond. What does it tell us about Lord Grey that he actually believes Lymond?
You mean that he believes that Lyman was actually trying to escape, or that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Lord Grey just has a better sense of who Lyman is than Austin does. Like, Lord Grey, I think, sees Lyman as an adversary, like an opponent, and so thinks of him in terms of strategy and all of that, but has respect for him in that sense.
There's a wonderful little line that's like, you cannot possibly dislike him as much as I have reason to do. But I kind of like this because our previous exposure to Lord Grey was he was completely humiliated by Lyman. So the fact that he's able to put the greater good over his personal humiliation just kind of intrigues me about him, because he was not at all sympathetic before, but it's kind of like a surprising thing. He's not a one-note villain either.
Yeah, I mean, his motivation is completely understandable. Like, of course he wants to get Lyman back to Russia. Like, that's absolutely the best choice for England and for his job and all of that. So,
and he's willing to risk his nephew to do it.
Yeah, was Austin the best person to send on this trip? I don't know.
The reason they give is like he's the only one that would recognize Lyman, but I don't know about that.
Probably not.
Really? Of every single person in England, the only person who knows what Lyman looks like is this guy? Like,
Isn't there a third Grey as well? Someone in the middle of them, or am I thinking of somebody else?
You're thinking of like the Whartons.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Whartons. All right.
There's like two Whartons with the same name, and it's like impossible to figure out which is which sometimes.
Yeah.
So we learn also that the Strozzi intervention has also been arranged by Lyman's men, similar as they sent him off to France. So they're kind of still trying to keep him from going to Russia.
They're never gonna be a thing. By the way, I was trying to pay attention in these 4 chapters. We don't know what's happened to St. Mary's, do we? Like, there wasn't any mention in these chapters.
Not really.
Jarrett's obviously not with them. He's left. Okay. I'm still curious about that. Like, isn't there a whole group of mercenaries wandering around somewhere doing something? No.
So it's also interesting that the whole you're going to have to murder 30 men who've been told not to harm you doesn't work for convincing Lyman to stay, but you can have a divorce works. Why?
I think he's doing it for Philippa's sake, because he feels that, in order to stay married to him, that's a great disservice to her, and he wants to get out of her life as soon as possible and get away.
Yeah. And
so, given that opportunity to give her what he thinks she wants,
Yeah. Yeah, his I think he's sort of like, this woman I love, the best way I can serve her is to sacrifice everything I want and, give her this thing I imagine she needs. But of course he didn't ask her. Like, in the time-honored tradition of people in love everywhere, they are not communicating.
I mean, why would they ever communicate?
Yeah.
I mean, where would the fun in reading that be?
But I mean, to be fair, the whole marriage was based around the idea that they would annul it as quickly as possible.
Right. But Philippe does not seem all that eager to do so, and he has clearly not picked up on that. But I think maybe it's just that this whole 30 men are going to murder you kind of thing is his own personal risk, and so he's willing to sort of fight through whatever to get to Russia. And it's like whatever obstacle gets thrown in his face, he'll just fight through it, whatever it is.
No, but it's you'll have to murder 30 men who've been told not to.
You know that at the very beginning when he kills the first 4? I don't think he knows that when he kills the original ones. It's after that he does. But
it's ambiguous, but I think
still killing them.
I think he's smart enough to notice they're not fighting back and to know that Strozzi would have said don't harm him.
Yeah, I think he's just like, whatever, I'm going through it. Like, it's an obstacle, I'm getting through it. But when Philippe comes up, he's, that changes his mind.
And pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like, there's no real hemming and hawing about it. He's like, okay, I accept. It's like, oh, great, you might have, and he even says, you might have brought this up before I killed 4 of your men.
Yeah. Well, that cracks me up because Strozzi's like, yeah, I didn't actually think it would work. You care so much. And meanwhile, poor Austin Gray makes his escape in the pipe of a privy.
Ew.
Shawshank Redemption there.
Yeah, Austin's very naive, and I have issues with him in terms of being like a nice guy TM, but I do feel bad for him here with this awful kind of like being berated by his uncle, because like he doesn't have a dad. We get the idea his dad was like not a good guy. All he's got is his uncle. His uncle doesn't seem to care that much about him. His uncle just kind of carelessly makes him feel bad. So here's Austin feeling like crap because he didn't kill Lyman.
Yeah, he does seem to have kind of the short end of the stick, but he just needs to go back to England and like find some nice girl and marry her. Like, Philippe is a terrible idea for him.
She's just so out of his league. He would always be like trailing in her footsteps. It's a little bit like Jared and Marta.
Yeah.
Not that Philippa would be cruel the way Marta is.
Like, Philippa flat out says something about, do you think I can do something with him? To Lyman later chapter. And it's so funny because it's so true. Like, is she going to marry, like, if she gets divorced, she has these options of who she's going to marry. Is she going to marry this like naive young guy and sort of mold him into whatever she wants? It's a choice.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like she likes him, but it is very clear that even she knows it would not be a partnership of equals. It would be her melding him. Although, to be fair, she also tends to be melding Lyman and ordering him around.
Yeah, I love the bit. We're just talking about this all out of order, but I love the bit where they're on the horses in the street and she's like, bow to your right.
And he does. And I think there's 2 moments also where she leaves him speechless and he literally can't talk because of something she did or said.
Yeah.
All right. Should we move on, or any other thoughts on chapter 1?
I don't have anything.
I will just celebrate the reintroduction of Lyman as a singer. And then return to France, and this whole sort of like reminder of Taddy Boy, and it's not the same, but it's a little, it's a good memory. There's still that bit of him alive-ish.
I mean, there's so many parallels to book 2 in this first 4 chapters, so it almost feels like it's a direct sequel of that book, even though there's been 3 in between.
It is kind of interesting that his like reintroduction to singing in France is pretending to be a eunuch, which is like the opposite of tagboy. And just that like this is kind of a funny like that is not the persona that you had. And an angry one too, who's like beating people up.
Yes, yeah. Defending his threatened masculinity by jumping into the crowd and fighting.
Yeah. So
I mean, yeah, you can read it logically, like no one's gonna guess that this is a general of France. But yeah, it's also just hilarious.
Oh, he's not yet at that point.
No, right. But a powerful figure. A powerful military figure, yes. All right, chapter 2. Again, I will just summarize the whole thing in one go. So this is Lyman's entry into Lyon as a general of France, seen through the eyes of Jarrett, who has married Martha, and they have settled in Lyon at the Gautier house from book 2, where the Dame de Johnce also lived. Martha also watches this entry and then meets up with Archie, who says, "Yay!" Who says that Philippa is also in Lyon, but Lyman doesn't know about it, to look at the Dame de Dutance's papers because she's digging into Lyman's family history, which you guys speculated about that would likely happen. Marta reveals that she is the one who devised the ultimatum that kept Lyman in France. Lyman speaks to the burghers of Lyon, which is like the rich merchants, and basically convinces them to not flee the city because they'll be hanged as traitors, and therefore to give lots of money to pay the army since they need the army to fight in order to stay alive. He then leaves, and while crossing the bridge back to his lodging, Lyman and Danny are both attacked by these like metal darts that are shot at them by a child. They don't die, but they are attacked. And that's chapter 2.
All right.
So we learn right off that Lyman and Jarrett have been communicating this whole time, which is something we didn't find out about at all in book 5, that he had any sort of communication with Jarrett or Marta anymore. He doesn't really have communication with Marta. He sort of does that through Jarrett, but it was just an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. And we find out like at the end of the voyage, Jarrett had married her. So they must have gotten married like right after the end of Pawn and Frankincense, which is interesting. I'm just like, really? What happened there?
See, that makes sense to me because they were so kind of stripped down and raw.
Yeah.
And like, remember it ends with her like crying in his arms.
Right.
So I think that's the only time when she would have been vulnerable enough to be like, yes, I'm gonna marry Jarrett Blythe, because then her walls went back up and like, the hell.
Yeah, it just seems like their marriage is really terrible. Like, I mean, it seems like they're functional, like they seem to have some sort of functional partnership-ish, like they're not killing each other, and they've been living in this house for several years. 2 years? Has it been 2 years?
Been 4 years, it says 4 years since they left Lyman, but that doesn't mean they came right back to Lyon as soon as they left Volos. So,
but 4 years, and so I mean, they've obviously come to some sort of like way to exist together, but it does not seem to be a very functional marriage.
Oh, and Jarrett, is it in this chapter or the next? Jarrett has been drinking too much.
Yeah.
So page 21, Jarrett wonders why, successfully settled in this handsome city, he troubled to further the career of someone who was, after all, no longer his commander. Later, his gloved fingers clenched, his pulse hurrying. What's going on with Jarrett?
He's nervous. He's nervous to be reunited with Lyman. It's been forever, and he remembers the way things always happen around Lyman, that he seems tongue-tied and flabbergasted, and Lyman always seems to get the upper hand. So I think he's
also still has a thing for Lyman.
And that too.
I mean, come
That's
on.
definitely part of it.
That's never gone away. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely how I take it. And I just love Dunnett. There's always this like sexual subtext between the two of them, especially from Jared's side.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the bit where it's like, apparently he's still smoking hot.
She mentions it several times.
Yeah, several times we get descriptions of how incredibly chiseled his body is. And the first thing Lyman says to him is like, you've gotten fat.
Yeah, your butt has gotten big, is what he says to him.
Oh my God, that part was so funny.
Yeah, and it's like, clearly it hasn't, based on her multiple descriptions of how.
Yeah, then she immediately describes his flat belly and lean hips, on which he had just been insulted.
Well, and I love on page 24 how Denny Hislop reacts to him. As soon as he meets him, he's instantly sort of jealous of him. "This man Jarrett," said Danny Hislop accusingly, "you said he was middle-aged." So he's like automatically assuming that there's something between Jarrett and Lyman.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh God.
Yeah. And right after Lyman makes the comment about Jarrett's butt, the narrator tells us Francis could always tie him in knots.
Yeah.
Also super funny that there's like a French guy who's with them, and Lyman says blandly in French, "Forgive me, Mr. Blythe and I are old acquaintances," to explain why he made a familiar comment in English. Mm-hmm. And then Jared says, "Don't apologize, Monsieur Le Provost speaks English." So the idea that he heard this racy comment and that Jared is super embarrassed by it.
I do think there's something interesting here that I want to bring up that I had a question about, and it's a little before this on page 23, where it says a young priest is standing beside Jarrett, and he's just asking about Lyman. He says, like, I told you fought sir under his blah blah blah. In Scotland, is he of good family? The usual question. He's the second son of a very old Scottish house. Jarrett said, watching the bridge, he has a Scottish property at Lyman, blah, blah, blah. His brother, Crawford of Coulter, has the title. "Ah," said the monk. He looked impressed. "I have heard of Lord Crawford of Coulter." And the usual answer, "You will have heard of the first Baron," Jarrett said. "This is 3 generations away." So clearly in Lyon, there are stories being told about Francis I. Because he's like, "You will have heard of the first Baron. This isn't him." So Jarrett has apparently encountered this multiple times, because we get the usual question, the usual answer. So I am intrigued by that.
Our first mention of Baron, not Baron.
Yeah, the first.
Oh, the first Baron. Sorry, yeah, the first Baron Crawford of Coulter.
Yeah.
We said last time, if we start learning a lot more about him,
I know.
Interesting.
That's what I said. I was like, all right, if he starts popping up, I'm gonna be more suspicious. And he's literally popping up. So I don't know. That just caught my eye. I was like, we don't know anything. We don't know what the stories are. We don't know what the rumors are that spread around Lyon, but there are some. So
I bet we might find something out in the Dom's papers, because remember when she first met Lyman, she said, "I knew your grandfather," and he's like, "And how's Sibylla doing?" So she knows his family. So
right,
probably some link there.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say this is very consistent with the second book, because the first Baron is mentioned several times because, like, people knew him in France and they know Lyman and Richard in relation to him.
But I wasn't paying attention in the second book. Now I'm paying attention.
You see why there's so much rereadability. You just, like, it's a whole new experience.
I feel like Queen's Play is going to be a completely different book when I read it again. Like, completely different.
I think they all are almost, because, like, also Disorderly Nights is a completely different book when you know that Gabriel's evil the whole time. The whole beginning section is so entertaining to see what he's really doing. But yeah, Queen's Play is full of layers. We also get the reminder that Lyman, despite being older, is actually also super hot and maybe even hotter than before. He had come into his looks in an odd way, and Marta is jealous about this.
Because he wasn't already handsome enough. Now he has to be like super handsome.
I think he was already super handsome. Now he's extra super
He's
handsome.
like magically super handsome.
I like how, without even looking for Marta, he picks her out in the crowd when she thinks she's being completely sort of hidden. Which is, I think, a nod to the fact that Lyman probably also picks Philippa out in the crowd when she's disguised as a boy, because I think he's not surprised at that.
Oh yeah, well yeah, that's the next chapter. He sees her in the yard with the other servants, and he's like, "Let's bring that boy in."
Yeah.
Mhm.
Clearly, he knows what he's doing.
That's what it is.
Yes, we can assume that Lyman has excellent vision.
Yes. When he's not in any kind of stress.
When he's not emotionally stressed out.
Yes. And it's also just really, I think, fun to have all these characters that we met at different times now together. So we've got like Danny and Adam and Jarrett and Archie and like, oh, what's it going to be like when they all interact? Already we have Danny and Jarrett.
Yeah. Yeah. Danny's gonna like run verbal circles around Jarrett. Oh,
Not difficult.
I like Jarrett, but he's kind of dumb.
He's back to his, this is jumping way far ahead, but we can see already how unobservant he is in chapter 4. So, but we'll get there when we get there.
Well, and it's telling that Jarrett is like the one who's like, oh yeah, he should totally go back to Russia. Why not? And
Yeah. It's like kind of dumb.
But he's hot and very good at fighting, and he really he's like good friends with Lyman.
He's got a good heart. I did come around to Jarrett. You know, eventually.
Loyalty.
Eventually.
He's loyal. He's mostly reliable.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on chapter 2?
Can we talk about the kids with the darts quick? Because that was a little weird. Danny keeps mentioning to Lyman. Lyman says, oh, I did see a child with it. And Danny's like, huh? I think you're lying to me. And I was wondering what was going on there. And then I was wondering if one of the children with the darts was supposed to be Philippa in disguise.
No.
I didn't think so.
I think what happened, what Lyman is lying to Danny about is not that there was a kid, but that he didn't recognize the kid. So Lyman says, where is it? I thought you said you saw, so let's see. I thought you said you saw one of the children. And then Lyman does something that looks like Middle English or something. He shall have been like the little bee that seeketh the blossom on the tree and sucketh on the primrose. You want me to look for him? It would seem obvious. Danny said, it would seem obvious if I ever expected to know him again. Can you dispose of your swaddling? So then he's like, take off your bandage to meet the wife of the governor. So it says, the idea had been conveyed to him. He noticed that Lyman had observed one of the murdering brats, but not closely enough to identify him. He distrusted, for some reason, that implication. So Danny thinks Lyman recognized one of the kids.
Okay.
Which I find. So he went further. He was perfectly sure that his lordship had lied to him. So I find that intriguing because either Lyman didn't really recognize the kid and Danny's mistaken, or more interestingly, Danny's not mistaken and Lyman did recognize the kid. In which case, why is there a random kid in Lyon that Lyman recognizes?
And we've already got in the second chapter somebody trying to kill Lyman. So the question is, who's betraying him this time?
Low darts, which
I know.
That's interesting.
I mean, we do know that there are people in this town that have sort of tried to sell the town out, the heads on the bridge, and then sort of he rounded up some other merchants. So it's very possible that someone's just trying to kill him because he's in town and it's an opportune moment.
Yeah.
But who knows?
I have a comment on this, which is, I think there's two parts of it. One is Dunnett is setting up the scene with Philippa, where she doesn't want you as the reader to realize right away that it's Philippa, so she's set up the idea that it could be the child with the blow darts.
Right, which is what I initially thought.
Yeah, and having Danny suspect that and showing you the scene from his point of view is sort of tipping you to like not realize that it's Philippa. Because you have this other like, oh, it's probably, you have the red herring. But then when you do realize that the later child is Philippa and was not the child on the bridge, then the mystery remains, who was the child on the bridge, and did Lyman actually recognize them? Nothing to do with Philippa, but a separate mystery.
Yeah. Intriguing.
It was Mary, Queen of Scots, in disguise.
I think she's a little older now.
I guess.
Also, Dee, as you pointed out, notable that Lyman is peppering his speech with quotations again.
Yes.
Back to the, he's not quite back to his old self, but he's not quite as reticent as our Russian Lyman.
Yeah. I like the singing. I like the quotes. We're getting a little bit of old Lyman back.
Just a bit.
Now he just needs to stop wanting to go back to Russia.
Well, yeah, and there's a great conversation later, like, why don't you just stay married to your wife?
Right. Seems
Still
like,
a possibility.
seems like she's kind of cool and really pretty. Maybe you could just stay married to her.
Yeah. No, I definitely want to dive into that. It's just because it's so funny, because then she's like, why do you want a divorce? And he's like, this whole thing is predicated on a divorce. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, should we jump into chapter 3?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Lyman is staying with the governor of Lyon, which is Saint Andre, who's not there right now, and his wife, Madame la Maréchale de Saint Andre, who is there. She doesn't like him. We find out at the end of the chapter, part of it is because he is being kind of set up to marry her daughter. And also he had sex with her husband. So she's, sort of primed to not be his biggest fan.
Ah, the French.
But he seduces her through the course of the chapter and solves that problem.
Really hot, so maybe I kind of like him.
Oh my god, this book. Okay, so the Chiati, who are Lyman's bankers, who we found out in the previous chapter that Philippa is staying with, they show up with a bunch of boxes of papers for Lyman. And this is where he sees one of the boys, one of the servant boys, and invites the servant boy in. And then we sort of get the whole misdirection because we see the point of view of Danny, and he thinks it's the boy from the bridge, but it is in fact, surprise, Philippa. And she's there not to see Lyman, but she had just been wanting to be able to go through the papers because she's still into the mystery of his heritage. So they sort of talk about how, oh yeah, she betrayed him and sent him to France when he wanted to go to Russia. And he says he fired his men for doing that. So they're technically all fired, even though several of them are still working for him as they look for new jobs. But basically that he doesn't have any consequences for Philippa because it's not his right to tell her what to do. So they seem pretty good. And he says okay, you can go through the papers. That's fine.
Which is kind of funny because technically if we go by the mores of the day, it's definitely his right to tell her what to do because he's her husband. So
yeah, but he's made it very clear that he's her husband in name only, and also, he's a little proto-feminist.
Right. So it's such a commentary on Lyman that he's like, I don't have any right to tell her what to do. Whereas most people at this time would say you totally have a right to tell her what to do. So
well, and it's very Lyman that he gets on better with women and respects women and tends to just connect with women better than with men. So, he's not gonna pull some misogynist stuff out of his back pocket, despite Austen Gray's interpretation of him.
Yeah.
Okay, so just quickly summarizing the rest of it, Philippa and Lyman discover that Marta has set them up to arrive for dinner at Jarrett and Marta's house at the same time. And so they decide to go together and pretend that they planned it. And then, so that's where we get the reveal about Saint Andre wanting Lyman to marry his daughter. And Philippa tells Madame La Marechale that she totally supports Lyman marrying her daughter. And Madame thinks, wow, this girl's weird.
Yeah.
And then we have Adam returning from dinner with Jarrett, who drank so much that he passed out, and we find a bit about how he's unhappy in his marriage, and then we end the chapter with Lyman drinking a little bit and sleeping with Madame La Marechale.
And annoying Adam in the process.
And annoying the readers too.
Yeah. True.
Okay, guys, thoughts on this chapter?
Well, so I liked the like Danny. So we get this Danny point of view at the beginning, and I like this bit where like Danny's watching Lyman and Madame, whatever her name is, and he's like, he says, delighted he settled in to witness a conflict. It did not come. It appeared that if driven to it, Monsieur de Sévigné could conduct and sustain a soothing conversation, which comprised blah, blah, blah. So like Danny is totally expecting Lyman and this woman to just be like, you know, and he's surprised by the fact that Lyman's so diplomatic, which I find interesting because we have seen multiple instances of Lyman being charming and diplomatic and like manipulating people with conversation, but apparently Danny was not expecting that. So it's another nice Lyman is kind of reverting to old Lyman, or maybe he's climbing out of this cold Russian thing.
So why is Lyman charming Madame and then sleeping with Madame?
He's collecting the full set. No, I don't know.
Oh God.
I don't know.
I mean, it's Lyman, so I feel like he has some ulterior motive.
Yeah, of course he does.
Is it to get in good with D'Andre again? To sort of find out secrets about him? Is this some sort of espionage tactic? I don't know.
Well, and keep in mind, Lyman wants to go back to Russia still, so he is not going to be very keen on marrying their daughter.
So is he trying to cause a scandal purposely so things don't go through, and he has an excellent reason to leave the country and go back to Russia?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of mom would be like, you slept with me and my husband, now marry my daughter?
Yeah. I mean, I would guess Lyman doesn't really care about his reputation in France, like, because he wants to leave. So it could be, I think, like, let the chips fall where they may. If this blows up into disaster, he can just go to Russia. But yeah.
So it is interesting how Dunnett writes around this, because she was writing in the late 60s or maybe the early 70s at this point. So we have on page 36 Danny's point of view, where he's hoping for details on his commander's disgusting past, and observing the names of Condé and Dangen and the Vidame de Chartres appearing in the conversation. And then we have the line about the French court was notorious for license and had hinted that Lyman's offenses in Madame La Marechale's eyes were partly to do with her husband. Her husband, Danny gathered, had not been offended, quite the contrary. The same appeared to be true of Misters La Vidame, the Marquis d'Angen, and the Prince of Condé. Added to what Danny knew for a certainty of Lyman's more orthodox conquests, it made an impressive tally. He stared into space, thinking of a Tartar girl.
Yeah.
So So when you add all that up, I don't see any interpretation other than Lyman slept with all those guys.
Yeah, Lyman totally slept with all those guys. That's 100% what's happening here.
But you
I mean,
could.
the only one
Okay.
they sort of mentioned in the second book was Dangan. So
I mean, he was like, it was very clear they were sleeping together more than once, but I think it was also super implied that he was sleeping with lots and lots of people, half the French court, men and women.
yeah, it did make
Danny,
sense.
like what we can be 100% sure in this passage is that Danny is 100% sure that Lyman was sleeping with all these guys.
Yes.
So it's, I mean, yeah, like he knew for a certainty Lyman's more orthodox conquest. It made an impressive tally. So his more orthodox conquests are obviously women. So his unorthodox conquests are the men. And tallying them together, it's pretty impressive. So
I feel like this is very similar to the Untamed, where like they can't come out and say something explicitly in a totally undeniable way, but the story doesn't make sense otherwise. So, you know.
and we're gonna toss chickens at you, which if you watch the Untamed, you will understand.
Watch it.
Lawanji.
So, did you guys guess that it was Philippa? And if so, at what point?
Barely before the reveal. Like, I did guess before the reveal, but like, I totally thought it was the kid from the bridge for a while. It was the red herring got me.
I think it was until the fan bit. I wasn't even thinking that it could possibly be anybody else.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But when Lyman commented about how deft the child was with the fan, I was like, oh, wait a second.
I think I got suspicious. So Lyman was questioning the kid about there's no chateau in and then Danny recalled something. So it says he wondered why his lordship claimed to be unable to identify the boy on the bridge. He's like, why aren't you accusing this kid of being the boy on the bridge? Then he recalled something he'd heard rumored once Lyman had questioned a child and lived to regret it. This time the name, so that got me distracted because then I was thinking back about like, so I'm like reviewing all this stuff in my head, and then and then I got also suspicious here where it says the boy, Danny said, were you on the bridge this afternoon? No, Monsieur Lebec, I did not make you fall off your horse. Perhaps you should question your harness maker. So then I'm like, oh, it is the kid from the bridge, because how else does he know that Danny fell off his horse? Like, so it was like, oh yeah, okay, so whoever this is, they were definitely there because they saw Danny almost fall off his horse. Yeah. And then the fan thing came up and I'm like, wait a second.
I'm just getting another line now too. One of the very first things he says, he asks the child's name. Je m'appelle Annabelle, Monseigneur. I must introduce you to an elephant keeper I know. I thought, of course, he was talking about Archie, but I thought he was making a reference to Hannibal and Hannibal's elephants.
That's what I thought too.
His name is Hannibal. But also, it's kind of a double thing because he knows very well that Philippa knows Archie very well. So, yeah, that's clever.
Yeah, and the reference to the child Lyman questioned and lived to regret it was Philippa. And we also found out in the previous chapter that she's staying with the Chiati. So all the pieces are there to figure out that it's her. But it's very similar to Tatty Boy, where there's also so many red herrings that, like, I think probably most people don't figure it out, but then when you reread it, you're like, oh my god, there's so many hints.
Yeah, this bit where it's like, you may close the fan as skillfully as you opened it. Below the dirt, the young skin of the boy Annabelle went scarlet. He pursed his lips, his eyes on the speaker, and then smiling with a flash of smiles. So then it's like, wait a second, why is this kid blushing about the fan? That's when I started to be like Philippe, like, oh wait, there's something here that's weird. But yeah, up until that point, I totally thought it was whoever did the darts.
And then Lyman gives the fantastic introduction of Madame la Maréchale de Saint André. May I beg leave to present to you the lady I am divorcing. And then Philippe is so proper and like lectures Lyman about proper behavior.
Yeah.
There's no occasion for both of us to be childish. When he could speak, I beg your pardon, said Lyman.
Yeah.
The first of many times she leaves him speechless.
Yeah, and I love that she I think, said his wife, interrupting him, I had better make my own apology. She's like, just stop. Yeah, it's just nice. And then she gets kind of offended about being dirty. She's like, my breeches are clean.
Well, and you know, like, don't worry about me sitting on your fancy chair.
Yeah.
So then she also makes this comment, if only we could get Guzel here for you. Lyman, who had not been prepared, just avoided vocalizing his reaction. He said his skin flushed to the roots of his hair. She might not be prepared to emigrate. So she manages to make Lyman blush bright red and like barely avoid making a noise because he's so shocked by what she says.
Yeah. I was confused about something, and I think this is just a detail that I missed, but these guys are bringing over papers for Lyman to look at, and it's the papers from the Hotel Gautier, is what he says. I thought perhaps Philippa says, I thought perhaps I could slip in with the boxes, then go sit and go through them at leisure while Monsieur Chiatti had them. He wouldn't unlock them for me. I'm so confused. Why are the papers with the Chiattis when they're going to go over to the Gautier's house and where the Dame de Dutances say, and there's papers there? Like, why do we have two sets of papers?
So I don't think it's explained clearly, but my assumption is the Dame de Dutances left an inheritance for Lyman.
Right.
The Chiatti are his bankers that are holding his inheritance. So probably all the money and any papers like related to the money went to the Chiatti. Okay. But the whatever mystery stuff that the Dame de Dutances wants Lyman to be the only one to enter the room for is still in the Gautier house.
That makes sense. It also explains like why they won't let her look at them, because if they're business papers or banking papers, then
yeah, and then there's like nothing that interesting in them anyway. So these are not like the secret family history papers. They're like the financial record papers.
I think another way of possibly looking at it is that these papers the Chiatti have, like Laura said, the inheritance papers and all, but they also might be primarily Gautier's papers, and the papers that are left behind in the Dame de Dutances' quarters are her private papers that were sealed up with her apartments and nobody's really been into.
Yeah, it could definitely be that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one of you mentioned earlier, Lyman really doesn't care what they think of him in France. And yeah, he flat out says, if they force me to stay in France, they will have to put up, won't they, with the consequences. This is his explanation for flirting with and sleeping with the Maréchal.
Yeah. I did love this bit where the Madame Marguerite, she says, talking to Philippa, my daughter has a sizable fortune. Do you imagine that your husband is a suitable spouse for her? Philippa pondered. I haven't heard of any complaints, she said with honesty. It's just like, he's probably pretty, my husband, he's probably a pretty good husband. I haven't heard people complain about him. Like, she's so pragmatic. I love it. And then let's see, more than most men, my Lord Sevigny seems to have led a life of some irregularity. You do not resent this? And then she says, well, not, of course, the rose tree of the garden of fidelity, but there would be little point, I should say, in resenting it. And then she gives this quote that I wasn't quite sure of. if you know or you not know it, you mayest you abate, and if you night or you I couldn't quite get the Middle English there.
Which page is it on?
45. This is Philippa speaking.
Yeah, the very top.
She's like, he's not the rose tree of the Garden of Fidelity. And of course, my husband sleeps around. And she doesn't seem to be too bothered by it. And then she gives this quote that usually I can parse, but I can't parse this one.
If you know or you not, you mayst you abate. And if you not or you know, then it is too late.
I guess.
I don't know.
He has a wonderful mistress.
Well, and she's just still like,
Tell me.
she's in love with Griselle, and
Yeah.
that's why he's saying back.
He has a wonderful mistress. That's why he wants to go back to Russia.
So you think this is a viable solution here? Catherine as the thing to keep him in France?
Is Catherine the daughter?
Yeah.
No. Catherine or someone else suitable.
Yeah.
Then who's Queen Catherine? Or is that just sort of a joke?
No, they just have different.
There's two different Catherines.
Yeah, there's lots of Catherines.
Okay.
I enjoy how kind of etiquette and propriety is like a mask Philippa can put on when the occasion calls for it and use to her advantage, but she has no investment in it beyond its usefulness.
Yeah, totally.
And it's actually very similar to Lyman and how he approaches things. They're both quite practical underneath and skeptical. So here's something that's interesting. Jarrett is drinking to excess and weeping and you know, all this stuff. Lyman is also drinking. He has a couple of drinks here, but then later on he's sort of not drinking very much. He's just drinking a little. So he's sort of like still in this intermediary state where like he's no longer abstaining, but he's not overdoing it. What do we think? Is he like in a better place? Is it a worse place because he's drinking again? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I do think he's drinking. He's not happy and he's drinking, which is not good. But it doesn't seem to be Tatty Boy levels of disaster. So, you know.
I feel like he's not so much distraught anymore as just perturbed that he's still in France and can't go back to Russia. I mean, if he was distraught, I don't think he would have taken the whole stay here for a year before you can go back to Russia thing. Like, it's just an inconvenience now to him. So I think he's sort of settling with this a little bit better than he was.
I'm not sure about that. I think he's not distraught about the not going back to Russia thing. Like, I don't think he's all that upset about it. He's just headed back there eventually. I do think that he knows that he's in love with Philippa and he can't have her, or he thinks he can't have her, and he's sad about that. And there is an emotional, like, I think he's distraught about that, but he's being self-sacrificial, and it's better for her if I, you know, throw my life away in Russia. So I will do that and all that. But I do think there's some emotion going on there.
Yeah. But I don't think he's as distraught at the moment that he can't immediately return back to Russia. So
No.
I don't know. I think the jury is out because we haven't gotten his point of view, but the fact that he was willing to kill 4 people who, again, had been told not to harm him, which is a pretty bad thing to do, tells us how intensely he wanted to go back to Russia. And the fact that he immediately changed his mind when offered the divorce tells us how intensely he's feeling about the divorce, for whatever his reasons are for that. So yeah, I wouldn't say at this point that he's not desperate to go back to Russia. I think we don't quite have enough information to figure out what's really going on with him.
That's true. And we do know that he rarely are the outside perspective able to pick up on what he's thinking or feeling. So,
and we haven't even had a Philippa perspective really yet. And we've had a bit, actually. We've had a bit, but yeah, we're still in like the beginning phases where like new readers are being introduced to him. So,
yeah. I do like this bit where Adam totally calls Jared. Like Adam totally reads Jared 100%, and he's like, they're talking about him, and Adam said, presumably he knew Jared. Presumably in the 4 years since he discovered her existence, he had come to know Marta as thoroughly. Adam said he adores her. Like, yeah, that's true. And then Francis Crawford, always interesting when he's called that. And yet he takes his friends to a tavern. His own marriage is in trouble. What then, said Francis Crawford, does he think of mine to Philippa? You know my wife is a virgin. Just like, Lyman, how much have you had to drink? Adam thought of leaving the room and then decided blearily to go through with it. It's just like, oh no.
What is your take? So there's quite an interesting bit on 47 where Adam has caught up with Jarrett about what Adam missed in book 4.
Mm-hmm.
And Lyman gives his point of view, smiling and twisting his cup, admiring the lizards and winged duck head ornaments, this sort of creepy imagery, and this creepy smile where he says, the little attack of blood frenzy in Algiers, the fat Turk I was good to on Jerba, the whores, the opium, the bastard I propagated on an Irish Kern's mistress. Jarrett knows it all. So this like worst possible take that you could possibly have of what Lyman did in the 4th book.
I mean, I think that's exactly it. It's the worst possible take on all of those things. It's the worst things and then the worst take on them. And that's how it lives in his imagination, in his mind, you know.
Yeah, he has no reason to have any fond memories of that trip, that whole period in his life.
But I mean, go ahead.
That means he's not going to speak fondly about them either. Like it's very acidic things that he's saying. So,
but I think it's more than not speaking. I think it's more than that he didn't enjoy the trip. Like I think it's his concept of his behavior on this trip is colored by this self-disgust, and it's not. He doesn't have an accurate memory of what happened because he doesn't see like I was raped by this Turk, you know, like whether he was held down or not, he did not consent to what happened to him and he was forced into it. But that's not the take that he has on that scene, you know, and he loved this little boy that died. And it wasn't that he propagated a bastard. And even he doesn't even like, even the way he talks about Una, it's like this Irish guy's mistress as opposed to this woman that I did actually have. He wasn't in love with her or anything, but he did have a connection with her. He respected her
very much, and respected her.
Yeah.
Well, and the opium, which is like, sweetie, that was not your fault at all. It was snuffing your food.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think this is just a glimpse of all of his trauma. And
I think it's somewhat telling that he's telling Adam here about the opium, because I don't know if he's ever shared that with him before. As we know, Adam had problems with opium as well in book 3. So this might be a moment for Adam to realize the things that Lyman was saying about, you know, because you remember when he got whipped in the face and he wouldn't give Adam opium? So maybe that's sort of driving that point home a little bit more to him as well.
Yeah, and I think of this in relation to like that passage where he thinks of the time Richard punched him out as you know, poor long-suffering Richard had finally lost his decent control or whatever. Like he thinks of it in the most kind possible way toward Richard. And just this way that like Lyman's perceptions are so skewed. His entire perception of like himself and his relation to others is really off, and his whole approach to the world then is sort of impacted by this like completely negative view of himself and then this overly positive view of some other people.
Yep.
And it does maybe hint to us that there's more going on underneath in terms of like what he's really thinking, if he's still having such, you know, distorted thoughts about his own behavior.
Yeah. It was a little sad that we find out that Adam isn't drawing anymore. That's sad.
And it's very weird. It's like, well, he's not with the military St. Mary's people, so he doesn't have anything to draw. And it's like, what? Who's just got other things to draw?
Draw a landscape. Look out the window.
Draw Leon.
Draw a building in Lyon, yeah.
Draw Marta.
Draw Lymond. Draw him like
seriously.
you would draw your French girls.
Draw Jared and his ass, which is not fat.
His giant elephant ass.
It's not an elephant size ass.
Okay, any other thoughts on chapter 3?
And then he sleeps with what's her name at the end. So
Madame le Maréchal.
yeah, and it seems very the way that it's told, it seems very like blasé, you know, just like calm. Her door opens, she's in her shift, she's like, hey, can I give you some wine? He walks into her room. Later he goes back to his room, you know, and it just seems like it's this very casual encounter. But I just wonder, I don't know, I wonder how that will come back. And like he did just meet his wife again earlier, who he does love, and then he sleeps with this other woman that night, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, and of course you wonder like why did he do that? Is it, you know, if you're a first time reader, you're like, wow, he likes sex a lot or something, but like that's not why he's sleeping with her.
Yeah.
Reminds me a question I meant to ask. How long has it been since the end of the last book? Like 2 or 3 months? I think we know that it starts in July at some point, but I don't remember when the last book really ended.
I don't either.
Yeah, I don't know offhand. I'm sure it's out there if we want to research it.
I think it's the same year at least. Like
yeah,
I think
it's just a few months. I don't think it's even long.
I think we're still in 1557, right? Because doesn't Elizabeth become queen in 1558?
Spoilers.
I think. I mean, this is my history knowledge, I think. So she has, I mean, that hasn't happened. Mary hasn't died, or at least news of Mary's death hasn't reached them. So I think they're still in 1557, which was where they were at the end of the last book.
Yeah, I mean, I think Queen Mary dying is going to have some sort of effect on the war, even though it's basically being led by King Philip. So
right, because then Philip will no longer, like the English. Like you have to wonder if Mary dies, and Elizabeth becomes queen, do the English like immediately sort of disavow Philip of Spain? Because 30 years later, we have the Spanish Armada. So the whole, like the Spanish Armada was in 1588. So relations between England and Spain totally devolve in the next couple of decades. So that's interesting.
Well, keep in mind Spain is very Catholic, and Elizabeth is not.
Elizabeth is not. Yeah. The Spanish Armada is the one date that my 8th grade social studies teacher insisted we all memorize, and I've never forgotten it.
I was gonna say, you know your history, your European history much better than I do.
No, it's just I just know that the Spanish Armada happened in 1588 because it was drilled into me as a 14-year-old. So
I had that with my 11th grade English teacher drilling where the apostrophes go in pretty much every situation where you could put an apostrophe in the wrong place.
That is
I hear you.
That is a good bit of knowledge.
My 10th grade American histories teacher spent like a whole month on Tammany Hall. So if you have any questions about Tammany Hall, I could tell you, but I don't know anything else.
Okay, should we move on to chapter 4?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Lyman spends the morning after his night with La Marechal at work planning the defense of Lyon, but he sneaks out in disguise as a monk, goes up this hill, is followed by Archie, attacks Archie, then realizes that it is Archie.
Saves him.
Yes, it saves him. And so they talk about the fact that Philippa, sorry, like, what did I write? Archie reveals that Sibylla told him to go to France with Philippa, warns him about Marta and her plot to keep him in France, asks him to meet with Philippa before the dinner, and he says no. And then Lyman asks him, who's your loyalty to, Marta, Philippa, or me? And he says, well, then it's to Philippa. He asks what Lyman was doing on the hill, and we don't get an answer, so let's go back to that. Lyman then picks up Philippa for dinner. They have some very entertaining banter. So then they arrive. Philippa looks at the papers. Part of the Dame de Dutance's will was that Lyman has to be the first person to enter her room. So he enters the rooms and then immediately leaves and goes and drinks with Jarrett. Some interesting conversation where Marta is like super encouraging Lyman to stay married to Philippa. And Philippa overhears that and finds out about the deal where Lyman is in France because of wanting the divorce. Then they have this whole conversation about why he wants the divorce, which gets quite passionate. But then at the end, they kind of stop fighting and they decide that they're going to search the rest of the house and the creepy Dame de Dutante rooms.
Which to me, it just feels like the middle of a Scooby-Doo episode. Like, we're gonna go search the haunted mansion. You know?
Ooh, I hope there's a hallway of doors on both sides where if you go in one side, you come out like the third door back on the other side.
Yeah.
And have a whole little montage where
And
there's
like,
chase scene.
Paintings with eyes that follow you. Okay.
So my first question for you is, what was Lyman doing on the hill?
Okay. It's got to have something. So this hill, is it the same hill with those dugout spaces where they fell into them in book 2? Because Lyman like tosses Archie into something and then saves him by grabbing him. Like, Archie fell.
It's not that same hill because that was like a rural hunt, and those are like rural, like troglodyte houses.
Okay.
This is in the city, so it's not.
Oh, I thought it was a hill outside the city.
No, because he just walked there from like the city hall, basically.
Okay.
So it's not that far.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
I have no idea. There's a shrine with a little statue.
Yeah. What is it? It's like a.
There's a shrine tangled with ivy overlooking the outcrop, and beside it a spring and a small statue decently carved.
Yeah. So Lyman is at the spring, and like Archie starts to fall. Like, I guess it's like the edge of the hill.
Yeah. Like, Lyman, it looked like Lyman like tosses him. He grabs his arm, somersaulting. He's
somersaulting to the edge of the outcrop.
Yeah.
Here's another question. If Lyman so readily recognized Marta after not seeing her for years and knew it was Philippa almost immediately in disguise, how did he not know this was Archie? Why did he not know this was Archie? What's going on there?
So this,
also, who's the pot-bellied oaf from mid-culture?
Another good question.
He says, I thought it was the pot-bellied oaf from mid-culture who was watching the house all morning. who's watching the house?
Or did he just mistake was Archie watching the house the whole morning and Lyman the whole time thought he was this pot-bellied oaf from Midculture? I don't know.
No.
I don't know about the guy from Midculture, but I will point out the end of this section on page 54. Francis Crawford watched him vanish. And then we have cascades of green light fell on his path and damask all the tall tree trunks descending below him, arresting him with blinding dazzlements.
Okay. I was wondering if he was having an episode and that his vision wasn't all there.
Oh yeah, and we have as he watched dimmed over with mists, leaving nothingness. So I feel like it's ambiguous, but there are strong hints that he is like having something of an episode, and that's why he left his morning work session to like go up this hill in disguise to try to deal with it.
I mean, it would be a very good reason as to why he didn't recognize Archie, especially after how deftly he found the other people. So
yeah,
it is also interesting. So Archie asked, "Why did you come to the hill?" Lyman looked at him and for a moment perhaps might have answered. Then he said crisply to look at the view. So it's interesting. I see two possibilities here. Either Lyman came up the hill to visit the shrine and it is important and it means something, and he almost told Archie what it is and why he went there. Or two, he went up the hill solely to deal with this headache and the oncoming episode, and he almost told Archie about that.
well yeah, and it would obviously be quite rare for him to tell someone about the headaches, but if he's going to tell anybody, Archie, the elephant doctor,
right,
is the person he would tell.
Right. So I'm still intrigued about the shrine, though.
don't know anything else other than it's just a shrine, right? Is it possible that there's somebody buried in a shrine? Is it like a cemetery kind of thing? Maybe he's visiting a grave? I don't know.
That's what I was thinking. Like, is there some sort of monument to someone there that he's visiting for some reason? But I don't know.
That where the Dame du Dutance is buried? She's from Lyon, who knows?
His grandfather?
Robin Stewart?
I know. Well, that's why I was wondering if it was that rule space, like that they were at before, because I thought, well, maybe there's like Robin Stewart's graves out there somewhere, and that's.
Remember, they buried Robin Stewart outside of the house where he killed himself.
Oh, that's right.
All right.
Here.
Who knows?
There's some great little snarky exchanges here. What do I call you, my Lord Count? Mr. Crawford will do. And then when Lyman asks, how is the third Baron Crawford of Coulter? Your brother is well, said Archie shortly. Like, call your brother by his name.
Yeah. Archie doesn't like, I love Archie. He's not one to stand on ceremony with Lyman all that much.
He doesn't kiss ass and he doesn't bullshit. You can trust him to be honest. What was your take on, I guess, why Lyman asked him to whom he's loyal and the fact that he said Philippa?
Well, I mean, I think both make sense. Like, I think Lyman knows Archie well enough to know that he is a loyal person, and Lyman also knows that his goals and Philippa's goals are not aligned often, and so that's a reasonable question to ask Archie. Like, when push comes to shove, who are you going to be with, me or my wife, me or Philippa? And I think Archie sees in Philippa, like, I think he sees her. You know, he spent so much time with her. They traveled together so much that
quarantined together.
We're quarantined together. in that very lovely short quarantine.
Only 40 days. Lucky them.
Oh my gosh.
With Wormy Pete, what was his name? Sheemy Wormit.
Yes.
Wormy Pete.
But also, like, I could see Archie thinking, like, Philippa needs somebody on her side. Like, she needs a right-hand man. Like, Lyman's got tons of, like, right-hand people. You know, like, he's got guys that he can, you know, send places and do things. Philippa needs somebody. So, I don't know.
It's an interesting shift. And also interesting that he's sent by Sibylla.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of skimmed over this, but at the beginning, when we're in Adam's point of view, it says, they said that whatever Lyman might elect to do in a woman's bedchamber, he never slept there.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes you wonder, like, how much has Lyman been sleeping around that they're saying this? Because it's like, is Madame Le Marechal not the first one? Because he did stay overnight with Una. So is this like he's always been this way, or is this like, oh, he's been sleeping around since he got to France
or Russia? Like, did he leave Gazelle's? Like, did they know that he left Gazelle's bed before this?
I was gonna say, I don't think he was sleeping around at all in Russia.
No, but he was sleeping with Gazelle. Was he?
Well, he was keeping her up all night with 5 orgasms in a row.
They were having marathon sex. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Well, we already know that Lyman doesn't like to sleep with anybody because he talks in his sleep.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think the question, is that a new thing since the opium, or has he always been that way? Because I'm pretty sure Tatty Boy was like passing out wherever.
I feel like somebody heard him say something in his sleep before the opium thing, but maybe not. Maybe it's just that he also didn't really like sleeping with anybody then. Although there was that one part in the second book where he didn't mind sharing quarters with a Liamro, but that's only because
they were rooming together.
And I think that's the night the hotel they were in burned down, and he had a feeling something like that might happen. So
but they they shared a bed right that night, but they stayed together like the whole time, like all of Quaid's play. They're roommates.
They're roommates the whole thing.
I love Quaid's play.
Kind of a bonkers book. Yeah, who knows? Oh, I was gonna say something and I can't remember.
It'll come back to you.
Do you think?
Oh, go ahead.
Do you think there's something specific that triggered? If we assume that Lyman's having an episode, are they just happening now with their own accords, or was there some sort of stress that happened sleeping with Madame Marechal or whatever business was going on in this meeting that caused this sort of? Because in the past we've seen him in moments of high stress and emotionality is when he sort of has these episodes.
Well, this is an excellent question. What do you think had just happened that could have caused it?
That's a good question. I don't know.
He just saw Philippa again. He just found out that they want him to marry this Catherine person.
And then he slept with the mom.
Yeah, and I mean, you could take the sleeping with the mom as trying to ward off the headache too, right? Because remember when he slept with the prostitute to try to deal with it.
Right.
I mean, I think it's ambiguous at this point, but I think we can assume he's having an intense reaction to Philippa because he always has an intense reaction to Philippa.
Yeah. Speaking of Philippa, here we go.
Yes, so he does not go, he meet her early despite her request. But he does pick her up and they go together at the planned time of 5:30. So then, yeah, we have the absolutely wonderful bow to your right. Someone is bowing to you. Lyman said reflexively, blah, blah, blah. He bowed to his right.
Yeah. Like,
And then also
having trouble seeing, or he's just not paying attention?
He's just not paying attention. Like, you know, they're surrounded by all these people and he misses this. And it's also just great because, like, you know, we're so used to Lyman noticing everything and being so on top of everything. But he's not superhuman, actually. And she's noticing some things that he hasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and then later it says he returned the salutes of another group of gratified merchants and obtained with a glassy stare Philippa's approval.
Yes. She's the boss. And
Yeah.
he knows it, and he's totally, yeah. It's like instinctive, you know? It's like, it's really like, this is the boy that was raised by Sibylla. When a strong, competent woman that he respects tells him what to do, he doesn't question, he just does it. There's also a great line where Philippa says, Madame la Marechale thinks, as a maiden lady, I should wear my hair down. And Lyman says, as a maiden lady, you would wear anyone down, including Madame la Marechale.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Philippa says, Madame thinks I'm following you about because I have a youthful passion for you. Philippa said tartly, I am extremely tempted, or were you able to reassure her? Philippa said tartly, I am extremely tempted to say no and make you fall off your horse.
Right. And then she said, I said you were a friend of my mother's, and I was a friend of your mother's. I should think that about sums it up. Lyman said his voice was a trifle unsteady.
Yeah. He like, I love reading this knowing that he's head over heels in love with her and she has no idea, because she's just stabbing this, like,
Yeah.
you know, intense emotions in him, and he's just like barely hanging on here.
Yeah, and then I did feel like this next bit. So Lyman's, his voice is a trifle unsteady. It doesn't do my self-esteem much good, though, does it? I mean, of course he's like, that's like a stab to his heart. You know, like, you're just a friend of my mom's, and I'm a friend of your mom's. That's all we have, you know. But then she says, your self-esteem has had a lifetime of steady attention, said Philippa abstractedly. And I thought that was interesting because, as we know, his self-esteem is actually rock bottom. Like, he actually has terrible self-esteem. And she's like, oh, you're fine. But she's distracted. She's like not paying attention.
Well, also, Lyman is known for his arrogance. And he is arrogant sometimes. I personally think he has the same diagnosis as Buffy, which is a superiority complex wrapped inside an inferiority complex. So I think that sometimes she knocks him off his pedestal legitimately. Like, he's got some arrogance issues along with his weird self-hatred, twisted view of himself.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, also, I like fell on the floor the first time I read, do you consider I'm old enough to stop calling you Mr. Crawford? No, said Mr. Crawford shortly. What alternatives would you suggest? Master? Uncle?
Yeah. Oy. Yeah.
I shall call you mon compere as the king does the constable.
Yeah. And I love, you haven't enough artillery, have you? Against you or the Germans?
He had relaxed again.
Yeah, he relaxed again.
This is also just so funny because, you know, he's still probably like trying to keep his distance, but they just can't not banter.
Yeah. You've been like, you must surely miss the court in London. They wouldn't have me back after I sent you to France, said Philippa briefly. She thought and remarked, I mean, actually, that's interesting. Philippa did send Lyman to France deliberately, and people would know about that. I can't imagine that's not seen as treasonous, because he's a brilliant military thinker and she shipped him off to France.
Well, yeah, but remember the whole she was gonna claim that she couldn't see which boat it was. So what she actually would have done is been like, I thought it was the boat to Russia. I had no idea.
Oh, right. Okay. So then she says, she thought and remarked, I miss Austen Gray. Tristram Trusty? And that was the bit about where she says, I think I could do something with him, don't you?
Well, and Lyman's answer is really interesting. He approves of Austen.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on that? Because Austen sure doesn't approve of him.
I mean, I think he thinks he's bland, you know, like that he's someone that Philippa can control. He's someone who's not going to hurt her. Like she can more than hold her own with him. And if he can't have her, he doesn't want, also she's not going to fall passionately in love with Austen Gray. so if he can't have her, then she might as well marry some bland milquetoast guy.
Well, yeah, he's chivalrous. There's good stuff in there. His behavior will be impeccable. So he's probably like, she deserves this sweet, innocent boy that she can, mold into a wonderful, loving husband. And maybe in an alternate universe, she could do that. And she would never be intellectually stimulated or have as much fun as she would with Lyman. But on the other hand, he wouldn't be a complete and utter wreck of a human being the way that Lyman is.
True. She might be bored, but she also might have a peaceful life.
Yeah. It's not the worst idea,
Yeah. I do love, if you're going to marry the youth, I shan't touch him, but you will be nasty to him, said Philippa gloomily. You can't help it. I shall probably be nasty to him, Lyman agreed firmly, but I shan't touch him.
He's being honest.
Yep.
And then this wonderful introduction to the Dame de Dutante's creepy house, the cressets flickering and the grotesques peering down at them from the arched caissons over their head.
Ooh, we skipped over something really quick though. Philippa is thinking about Lyman's. Lyman had encountered Richard, so he had thought about. She talks about the prophecy, your father's two sons will never meet again, and then she said, but he had met his brother again, had ended in blows. Francis Crawford would have nothing to do with his own bastard son or his family. So is this implying that Philippa did not believe Lyman when he said that he lied about lying? When he said it, when he told her that he lied to Margaret, and then later he told her he lied about lying to Margaret. Are we thinking that Philippa ultimately thinks that Kazum is his son?
No. I think it's pretty clear that Lyman at the end of last book said, "Oh, I was lying to you, and I'm sorry." So I think she
says Francis Crawford would have nothing to do with his bastard son. That's Kazum.
I take it as in the eyes of the world, this is his bastard son, and it's a little TMI to just like rehash what he actually is for like the new readers at this point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, did she not pick up on that? Because I thought it was pretty clear.
No, it was definitely clear.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and technically the social relationship is that he's Lyman's bastard son, even if he's not his blood son.
Right. Also, interestingly, Lyman did not like to be touched. She had found that out a good while ago.
Well, I was seeing that as like when they were on the boat and she tried to give him the medicine or whatever and he knocked it out of her hand. Is that?
Maybe, but I'm wondering if Lyman doesn't want her to touch him because of how he feels about her. Like, and that's because that's not always been true. But if she found out, like, and clearly he doesn't mind touching other people. So if she's saying Lyman doesn't like to be touched, like, I was just wondering if he's just avoiding touching her because of the way he feels about her.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a likely thing. Remember, and there was like the part in the past book where he like got one of the grooms to take her off the horse. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're probably right. He's particularly avoiding touching her. Because it's torture, because he loves her.
Oh, sweet torture.
He can't have her, so he doesn't want to touch her.
So also go ahead.
Nothing. I was just going to talk about Jarrett for a second.
Well, just as they're about to go into the dinner, shall we go in lewd and rude and provoke them? Yeah, that's Lymond.
Yeah, and it was Philippa supposed the groan, her punishment for involving him in her private obsession. You can just see her like rolling her eyes and like, oh, come on. And then Jarrett doesn't recognize her, which is Hilarious.
Which is the second time this has happened. This happened in Pawn
Oh.
also when she was in Seraglio. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Jarrett.
And Marta, who is probably close to as observant as Lyman, is like, that's Philippa.
I love how taken aback Jared is that he gets a hug from Lymond.
I know.
What is happening?
Yeah.
It had never happened before.
Yeah. And Lyman looks at him with affection. With amiable satisfaction. And Marta, of course, can't resist being sarcastic and be like, if you do it again, the servants will applaud.
The practice
to kiss the bride, Francis.
This is really interesting, though, because we have not seen Lyman have this kind of relationship with anyone probably since the moment before they find Una's body, when he's like, you know, he has that very candid moment with Jared, like, don't let me drive you away. And it's super interesting to me because Jared is not the brightest bulb, but Lyman really, really likes him. And like really kind of needs a person like Jared, needs what the complement of what Jared brings to their relationship.
So interesting to think how Russia may have been different if Jared had been there.
Oh my gosh.
It
would have been so different. Jared would have been like, you're not calling me Blythe?
Right.
Call me Jarrett. What's wrong with
Hell
you?
no, my name's Jarrett.
Right.
I ain't listening to you anymore.
Get over it.
Yeah, and call Adam. Stop being a dick.
What is wrong with you?
And then Jarrett would have drank a lot of Russian liquor. Oh,
He probably would have got himself killed by the Tsar in like a week.
Yeah.
I guess that's a pretty good explanation as to why Jarrett wasn't in the last book at all.
Yeah.
That's what worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no way he could have navigated Moscow. Like,
no. But also, like, we really couldn't have had Lyman have that degree of isolation if someone like Jarrett was there.
Right.
So I also love how Philippa covers the fact that Marta set this up as a trick, and instead is like, we've been working on this for days. Did we succeed in surprising you? And it's just very generous of her. So this is interesting on 61. Perhaps Marta had saved him from the degradation of his own addiction, but there was something different in her eyes now. Contempt, defensiveness. And this just makes me sad because I really loved how they bonded in Pawn.
Yeah. And envy. I mean, keep going with the quote and what Lyman had just defined as subtle envy.
Yeah.
But we skipped a little bit so Philippa gets like goosebumps when she sees Marta and Lyman together, and then Lyman, his eyes on the other identical eyes, turned out the palms of his hands, yielding and empty. I have no more than you have, he said to his sister. And then she replies, my dear, you have all the Dame de Thompson's fortune. But he's not talking about money in this. Like, I have no more than you have. I think he means family. Like, I don't know.
Or Guzel, or a happy marriage.
Yeah, I mean, like, he doesn't have like any of that, neither does she.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So he's, whatever she's envious of him, it's like, I don't have what you're envying.
Yeah. Because we talked in the last book about like her wanting to belong somewhere, and like he doesn't belong anywhere either at this point, or doesn't think he belongs anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if anything, she has a place she belongs more than he does. She's got a house and a husband and a job. Yeah, and he flat out says to her, you know that Prince Vishnevetsky has taken my place in Boroyevo. And then she brings up the fate thing. You will not go to Russia because your fate is here. So why is she trying to keep him in France?
Maybe she knows something that we don't know yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a question. Like
Yeah.
that is one of the questions I'm asking. I do not know, nor do I have a guess about what's going on with Marta, which is fairly typical with Marta and me. I never know what's going on with her.
I also enjoy this reference to one of the rooms, Gautier's storeroom and workshop, which had once contained a horological spinet of some small notoriety. Like blast from the past again.
Yeah.
There's some interesting information on page 61 about the trabules below the house, which I assume are some sort of underground tunnels. And I can't help but think that's put there because they're going to have to use them at some point, like it as an escape or something. It just seems very perfectly placed.
I was wondering, is it something where I didn't think it was underground? I thought it was like a tunnel through the first floor. Like, because like if you think about the way houses look, sometimes houses look, the first floor is like this like stone thing, and then you've got like the nicer part of the house above that.
Mm-hmm.
And you enter, like you go up steps and enter the front door, but on the second floor, not the first floor, or the ground. For people who are in England, like the ground floor versus you enter on the first floor, but not the ground floor. So I thought it was like tunnel, like a archway with a thing through the ground floor so that you can go from one street to another street, like, but you're not walking through the house.
Right.
That
I just have a feeling they're going to come into play. It's oh, we have a picture.
Oh, the picture. Oh, good. Wait, that's not even the ground floor. What?
I think they're like passageways. These must be more modern.
Holy cow, those are complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's...
Yeah, that's what I was imagining, the second picture.
Because they also compare them to the ones in Edinburgh, which I have been to, and those are like just like really narrow streets that go like through or between the houses.
Like an alleyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was imagining the bottom right picture or the second picture on the top row. That's what I was thinking they were.
Yeah, I guess this obviously is like a more modern one, but yeah, I think it gives you the idea. Passageways.
So I'm gonna keep my eyes on that just in case they have to make an escape at some point. I don't know how long they'll be in Lyon for, so.
Yeah, there's gonna be some sort of chase scene through like tunnels and alleyways and whatever.
I mean, that's like Dunnett. Introduce some small random thing and then, oh, there's a reason I introduced this. So.
Yeah, true.
So we also have just more wonderful like Gothic horror house descriptions. I love how she just dips her toe into a genre and is like, I'm going to give you every trope of this genre. The lustreless chill of a complex house maintained by masterless servants. Each of the objects Philippa had asked to handle, exclaiming over its beauty, had left its trace of dust on her fingers. Even the Venetian goblets from which they drank were clouded. Like, it's just so Gothic horror.
Yeah.
And they brought wine for the guests, and predictably Jared himself had consumed most of it.
Oh, Jared. Don't be an alcoholic, Jared.
But again, we get the reminder that he's still hot with his finely built body and powerful legs and strong swordsman's hands.
Jared.
Like, she just cracks me up that she keeps describing it in this way, and I'm like, is this the narrator's point of view? Like, is this Lyman's point of view? Like, who keeps thinking how hot he is and making sure we're always reminded?
Yeah. Very important that we remember how attractive Jared Blythe is.
So then they basically have an argument about like why Martha's like, why won't you stay married to Philippa? And then Jarrett gets all angry, like, are you trying to force Philippa to stay married to you? And Lyman's like, no, the whole point is I'm trying not to stay married to her. And then Philippa's like, why don't you want to stay married to me?
And Lyman's like, I'm sorry, are you insulted? Why do you want a divorce? Because I assume you would prefer to be free. And then she's like, I suppose I should. But on the other hand, I'm not in a big hurry about it. And I do love this where it's like the double candlelight underlit his hair and his eyes and his cheekbones, all of them untrustworthy evidence. Philippa, from long experience, washed his hands.
Yeah. And just the way he loses his temper and is like, am I to assume that you're willing to dispense with this divorce if I, well, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm delighted, only the change of policy is a little tardy. And Philippa viewed a little pale, stood and viewed the spectacle of Lyman losing his temper.
And yet she says, don't be silly. Like, she's a little pale and he's losing his temper, but she's still like, don't be silly. It would be stupid to do. You know, she's still just railing at him.
Well, and he quite blatantly bullshits her and is like, I'm doing this because I want to go back to Guzel, because he's picked up that she thinks he's in love with Guzel. So he's just then in return being like, yeah, it's because of Guzel.
Right. And then this bit that Philippa said just really hit me, where she says, they're talking about the times that Lyman hit her. I hit you on the jaw, you hit me another time on the arm. She says, it happens all the time, Philippa said courteously. I was where someone didn't want me, and if they place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left and ask me to give up my mission, I will not give it up until the truth prevails or I myself perish in the attempt. Are you going to strike me? And just that, it happens all the time. I was where someone didn't want me. And it's just like, Philippa.
Someone remind me when Lyman hit her arm. I remember the face because he was trying to get her out of the castle where Will Scott died. So
yeah, the arm was when she was trying to give him medicine on the boat and he knocked it out of her hand.
Okay.
Well, and she says, with or without a divorce, I'm quite capable of making my own arrangements. So she's implying that, like, she, as a married woman, would sleep around, which is, you know, so
true.
But she wouldn't. Like, she wouldn't, like, no. It's not very Philippa.
No, but it is true. I mean, as a married woman, or God forbid, a widow, she would have much more freedom than if she's back to being a single person. So.
Yeah, but she's still bullshitting him because.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You know, she's not gonna actually just go sleep around. No. And she has plenty of suitors like that she could marry.
But I think this is her referencing, like, using the cultural norms for her own, just like she does with the rules of politeness and all of that. It's like, married women do this. I could do it, you know.
But it really sets him off, like, because then that's when they talk about him hitting her. Yeah. You are being deliberately and spitefully obstreperous. You have never made any arrangements outside marriage, and you have no intention of making any, even if I felt constrained to break my agreement and start back to Moscow tomorrow. You know, he's like pissed off that she has made Jarrett mad at him.
Yeah.
And poor Jarrett over there, like, what?
And then I love Jarrett. Jarrett sat down. He said, I don't understand.
When do you ever, Jarrett? When do you ever?
So true. I don't understand.
I love him. He is. This is just so Jarrett, where he's like, them's fighting words. I'm gonna hit you, and then he's like, wait a minute, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm confused.
And then the way he breaks the tension. Christ, Francis, have you gotten into the Maréchal's bedroom already? And then Lyman bursts out laughing.
Yeah. And then interestingly, Philippa, like, looked at Marta and found Lyman's sister already staring at her with an odd look, not entirely friendly, which she failed to interpret. I think that is interesting that Philippa just can't read Marta.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still this mystery of like why Marta wants so much for Lyman to stay married to Philippa.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, there's the possibility he just doesn't want her to go back to Guzelle because of her past relationship with Guzelle.
Very much so, and that keeps coming up. You said she was with Prince Vishnevetsky.
Mm-hmm.
Giselle would be sent to a nunnery.
That wouldn't go over well.
Oh, goodness. Well, actually, if she worked her way up to the, I mean, I don't know how they work in, I don't know, I do not know how they work in Russia, but the leader of a nunnery actually had a ton of power. So
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that the world stage of like, nation building is a little different than running a nunnery.
I mean, there's a lot of political influence there as well. Like they had money. It was a thing.
And
Probably not her thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say for many people perhaps, but Guzelle is, she's like the cream of the crop in terms of power and whatever.
I also love that Lyman tells when Jarrett tries to ask about Lyman's birth, like that what they're trying to figure out in the papers, and Lyman tells him, "You're not old enough to be told yet."
I like that it's still playful and it's not entirely harsh yet with Jarrett. Like there's still this, this familiarity between them that they haven't felt in a long time. And Lyman hasn't sort of lashed out at him in an awful way yet. I said yet for a very good reason.
No, I mean, Lyman hugged him. Like,
yeah?
Lyman's happy to see Jarrett.
Yeah.
I just wish that same sentiment was with Marta. There's already this tension between them, which is sad, like you said.
I also love the way that Philippa uses this biblical quote to talk about searching the house. It's like they're gonna go wander through this gothic, like creepy house looking for prophecy / document / who knows what the hell. And she says, remember, the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Which is like such an interesting, we gotta get in gear because there's not very many of us. And then Francis Crawford again replies, "Oh, confound you! In the dark, faint, faltering, and fearful, importuned."
He is Francis Crawford quite a bit when he's with his friends and family. Yeah. So, what do you think they will discover in the Dame de Dutance's locked away rooms?
I'm sure she left something behind specifically for Lyman to find. I don't know what, though. More prophecies. Maybe she's actually still alive.
She's haunting the place.
Maybe she's like Miss Havisham up in the attic.
Yeah. I do think whatever they find is just going to be giving them more questions. It's not like they're obviously not going to find the solution or the answer to their questions. And if they do find an answer, it's just going to lead to more questions because we are on chapter 4 of a very long book. So there's still a lot more to go. But yeah, it'll just be another puzzle or another thing to figure out.
Where do you expect things are going to go with Lymond and Philippa?
I think at some point Philippa's going to realize that she feels a certain way too, and there's going to be a moment of realization between the both of them. And they're like, hey, why don't we just stay married? But Lyman's going to have to get over the whole going back to Russia thing first. So at least that's what I want to happen.
Yeah, that's what I want to happen too. But I feel like that is not going to happen. I feel like they are going to be coerced. Like they're going to have to be pressured or coerced, or there's going to be some like locked in a room together, or the whole fanfic trope of like there's only one bed, like something where they're
They already
like
did that trope.
Yeah, they've done that already.
did that one, that's true, they already did that one, but in a way that it works. It just feels like they're not going to sit down and have an adult conversation about their feelings. So what else could happen? I don't know.
Well, somehow I think Philippe is definitely going to discover that Lyman does have feelings for her, because she's still completely oblivious to it at this point. So,
I mean, one thing that's interesting is that we are at the start of a long book, and Lyman's like probably most vulnerable point is Philippa at this point, and she is there with him. So is she going to be like, I can see there's a lot of potential for her to be, I don't know, kidnapped or held, threatened, or somebody uses her to try and force Lyman to do something. Jarrett tries to go off and rescue her in some dumb, doomed to fail way. I didn't just see this happening because she is such a point of vulnerability for him. So she's going to be not a weakness, but a place where he can be influenced. And so
I actually hope that doesn't happen, to be honest.
Me too, but I could really see it happening.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask, if Philippa were to discover that Lyman is in love with her, how would she react? And if Philippa were to fall in love with him and he were to discover it, how would he react?
I mean, I want to say they would have this mutual awareness that they're perfect for each other and then everything would be great, but that's not going to happen.
Not going to be that simple.
No.
They'll both try and hide it from each other as long as possible, I think.
For sure. And I think if Lyman realizes that Philippa is in love with him, I don't think it will actually change his behavior at all. Because I think his problem is not that he thinks she doesn't care about him, which he does think that, and I think he's kind of sad about that. But the problem is that he thinks he's not good for her. And so whether she's in love with him or not, he still thinks he's not good for her and that she would be better off with someone else. Now, Philippa, if she figures out Lyman is in love with her, I don't know.
Is that a cat noise that I hear? Oh, goodness. Is that both of them?
Both of them, yeah.
Oh.
Snuggling, little sisters. Sorry for the distraction.
Well, they hadn't made an appearance yet, so I figured we might as well give them a moment.
Well, they've been here the whole time. The whole time. Sweet sisters.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
You don't know how Philippa would react?
I mean, it could be anything from like freaking out, at the thought, like this isn't something she considered, and so being faced with it, like, I don't know, freaking out, running away, whatever, to, realizing she's in love with him and having her pragmatic self just be like, okay, we're together, and somehow along the lines of bow to your right, just be like, you're with me now.
Wonder how much of her sort of relationship with her mother would influence, though. Like, is she aware that Kate has feelings for Lyman? And how would that sort of color the relationship if she realizes that she is in love with Lyman as well?
Because remember, Jolita called that out and made Philippa cry when Philippa was like 13.
That's true.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, Lyman hasn't seen Kate no, they did see each other in the last book, but
and like Kate super betrayed him as far as he's concerned. by having Sibylla there when she said she wasn't going to mention anything about that. So I'm sure he's still very sort of sore on that subject. So
He doesn't really hold grudges though. Like it's kind of weird. He reacts really intensely, but then he's like, "Oh, okay, I forgive you."
yeah. I mean, it's true. If he held grudges, he'd never speak to Philippa again about 20 times over in the course of these series of books. So
Yeah, and the way he's like, forgives Richard like instantly for all Richard's stuff. Like he's actually very forgiving.
he certainly held a grudge to Gramarine Mallet, though.
I don't know if that was well, yeah, it was a grudge, but it was also like
Either a grudge or it was him thinking he was ridding the world of truth.
Yeah, I mean, it was a legitimate, this guy is a, very real and present danger to the world.
Yeah, well, and he actually struggled with like how much of this is just me having a grudge because I can't stand the guy versus how much of this is me saving the world from evil. And he actually was like held back more than he should have because he was afraid it was just a grudge. And yeah, in retrospect, should have just like assassinated him when he was unconscious and fell off that wall.
Really? Oh, the tragedy that could have been averted.
Any, I guess, final hopes, predictions, thoughts on these chapters and what's coming up?
I think it's too early to really know what's going to happen in this book yet, so I don't really have anything. I am excited for the exploration of the Dom's house, though. That's going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm hoping we don't get too much like battle strategy. Like I don't want a lot of like this battalion went here and that general sent these people over to this direction. I'm like, I don't care. So I hope we don't get a lot of that. But
I do think this book will last long enough, though, to see Queen Mary die. And I think we'll probably get reintroduced to Mary Queen of Scots at some point because he's in France where she is. So that would make a lot of sense. So maybe he's there for the wedding to her to the Dauphin. That hasn't happened yet, I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, it would seem weird if we don't get Elizabeth ascending the throne at some point in this book. Like there's just a little paw that came out into that's so cute. Yeah, so I do hope we get that. And I don't know. I would like to find out what's going on with the St. Mary's crowd. Is there anybody we know that's with them?
Yeah, I guess who do you want to know about? Like, what's his face? Lancelot Plummer stayed in Russia. Alec is with Lyman. Jarrett's with Lyman. Adam's
I
with
thought
Lyman.
Alec and Fergie went to fight with.
Oh, right. Yeah, they got fired.
Yeah, fired. I'm sure they'll still be around, but at the moment they're fighting with the constable.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I do love that Lyman's like, you're fired, but you can stay with me till you find a new job.
He's not really good at this.
No.
You're fired, but stay with me. Don't ever leave my side.
I can't remember who's the St. Mary's that we still know. Like maybe nobody, but I'm intrigued. Like it's still a mercenary group wandering around somewhere. Like where are they? What are they doing?
Well, and they were set up so like the company that was to become famous in Europe, and we're like, have they really done anything yet?
Yeah. And maybe
last we've heard they were in France.
Yeah.
It's been a while. Like who's in charge, and do they still report to Lyman? Also, did Hercules Tate go back to Venice, where he was? I know that he's not allowed in England anymore, so.
Yeah.
He said he didn't want to go back to Russia with the rest of them, so he sort of went his own way.
Oh yeah, he was like, I'm over the mercenary thing.
Yeah.
It does seem that if St. Mary's is still a viable mercenary group, it would be a valuable asset for Lyman to have. So
yeah, I mean he's also got like the armies of France now.
And don't forget, Scotland's in the war too. So I think we'll see some action on the Scottish side as well. Like maybe some split narratives.
Oh, I kind of hope not, because who are we going to spend time with?
Richard!
I don't really
Or
want
Sibylla.
maybe Sibylla. I want Sibylla to come to France. Sibylla has to come to France because this is where everything happened. So we have to come full circle, and she has to come back here and deal with whatever this is. So, and bring the original papers of whatever those papers were.
Well, the map in the beginning is mostly France, but Scotland is there. So I don't know. Maybe Lyman will go back to Scotland once he discovers the truth and confronts Sibylla.
Yeah,
Or will he not get the full truth until he confronts Sibylla?
also, maybe. That's a good guess. I do think that there is going to be like a big showdown confrontation about the family at some point. I hope it's not like the second to the last page of the book. Like, I hope it happens earlier so that we can get some of the fallout and some like what's the consequence of this. I would like to see that, but maybe we won't. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching and commenting. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.